Number 8. EUSTACHIO GALLESE. In 2019, a man who was originally sentenced to life in prison in 2006 was paroled after his risk of reoffending went down. But the decision to set him free so he could satisfy his twisted primal needs turned out to be a horrible, irreversible mistake since he murdered a 22-year-old woman in Quebec City, Canada. EUSTACHIO GALLESE was sentenced to life after he was found guilty of killing his 32-year-old girlfriend Chantal Deschênes in 2004. The woman's body was found after she'd been stabbed repeatedly and beaten to a pulp with a hammer. Despite this, Canada's parole board granted GALLESE day parole in March 2019 at a halfway house, and his release was extended for another 6 months in September. It was during this time that another one of GALLESE's victims, LEVI, was found dead at a hotel in the St. Foy district of Quebec City. LEVI was a sex worker who met GALLESE at an erotic massage parlor she worked at. The two of them returned to the hotel for some fun after GALLESE was banned from LEVI's massage parlor for behaving violently with some of the masseuses there. It's unclear why the young woman decided to stay in GALLESE's company or go to a second location with him, but her lapse in judgment resulted in her death. The day after the murder, January 23, 2020, GALLESE turned himself in to the local police, and shortly afterward, the 22-year-old's body was discovered. GALLESE was initially charged with second-degree murder for killing the poor young woman, but the charges against him were upgraded on February 24th. In the end, he pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and was consequently sentenced to life in prison for the second time. This entire situation probably could have been avoided if GALLESE was kept in prison. Number 7. The Oklahoma Cannibal. A repeat felon from Oklahoma confessed in early 2021 to killing his neighbor, cutting out her heart, and cooking it for dinner. He did all of this right before killing a 4-year-old girl and his uncle. On February 9th, 42-year-old Lawrence Paul Anderson stabbed his neighbor, Andrea Lynn Blankenship, to death at her home in Chickasha. Afterward, he went back to his own house and stabbed another 3 people, his aunt, uncle, and their young granddaughter. According to the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, police officers found Anderson's 67-year-old uncle, Leon Pye, and the 4-year-old Chaos Yates injured. Unfortunately, the young girl didn't survive, and she was pronounced dead on the way to the hospital. Delcy Pye, Anderson's aunt, was also brutally stabbed in both of her eyes, but she survived the gruesome attack. In an interview with investigators, Anderson revealed the shocking final meal he'd fed his family after killing his neighbor. Apparently, he cooked the woman's heart with a few potatoes and fed it to his relatives to release the demons. The horrific triple murder sparked outrage in the small Oklahoma community after it was revealed that the killer had just been released from prison in January of that year, 1 month before the murders took place. Back in 2017, Anderson was sentenced to 20 years in prison for gun and drug offenses, but at the recommendation of the parole board and the Oklahoma pardon, Governor Kevin Stitt shortened his sentence to 9 years. He was released for parole in January 2021 and had been staying with his uncle and aunt at the time. Jason Hicks, Grady County District Attorney, charged Anderson with 2 felony charges of assault and battery with a deadly weapon, 3 counts of first-degree murder, and maiming. During his initial court appearance, the killer openly sobbed and told the judge, "I don't want no bail, Your Honor. I don't want no bail." In the end, his wish was granted, and he's currently being held in jail without bond while his case works its way through the court system. Perhaps Anderson couldn't handle life outside of prison walls. Thankfully, he'll never get the opportunity for freedom again. Number 6. Mass shooting. In late 2022, a paroled felon from Chicago was charged with brutally murdering 3 people in a mass shooting before turning the gun on one of the victim's young daughters. 32-year-old Samuel Parsons Salas was caught on camera grabbing a firearm from his vehicle outside of Vetta's lounge. According to the Chicago Sun-Times, he then picked out his victims, shooting a few of them at point-blank range. The daughter of one of his victims ran over to her slain father and was met with a bullet in her head, putting her in critical condition. The violent criminal, who was arrested after running from SWAT officers, also kidnapped another woman and held her hostage while leaving the scene. The murder spree came less than 3 months after Samuel was paroled. In 2014, he was convicted of an armed home invasion that caused the deaths of 2 innocent people. Based on his past, Chicago's top police officer, Superintendent David Brown, called for the judge appointed to his case to throw away the key in order to finally get Samuel off the streets for good. He begged for the criminal not to be released on electronic monitoring because, in his own words, he's not only a danger to his community, but to the city of Chicago as a whole. On the day of the incident, Samuel was attending a birthday party for Maria Vera at Vera's Lounge. Maria was the woman left in critical condition after getting shot in the head. Apparently, Samuel had been kicked out of the party for some reason, and this triggered his anger. After being confronted outside the establishment, he grabbed a gun out of his car and opened fire on the crowd, killing 26-year-old Mario Pasuelos, Maria's 50-year-old father, Ricky Vera, and 24-year-old Mercedes Tavares, and a mother of 3 that was later pronounced dead at the hospital. As a result, Samuel has been charged with 3 counts of murder as well as kidnapping and several counts of attempted murder. He has yet to be sentenced for his horrific crimes, but he's currently being held behind bars without bail. Number 5. Gregory Green. In 2016, Gregory Green from Detroit, Michigan was arrested for killing his 4 children and torturing his second wife. This all came after he served 15 years behind bars for the murder of his first wife 25 years before. Back in 1991, Green was charged with stabbing his pregnant wife to death, which ended in a second-degree murder conviction. He served some jail time but was ultimately released in 2008. Then, only 8 years later, Green committed a series of horrendous crimes, leaving his 2 biological children, as well as his 2 stepchildren, dead. Police were called to the couple's home after Green placed a 911 call himself. When they arrived, officers were horrified by the gruesome crime scene. According to a report from Click on Detroit, Green's 19-year-old stepson, Chadney J. Allen, and his 17-year-old stepdaughter, Kara Allen, were both found dead in the basement after being shot execution style. The man's biological kids, his 4-year-old daughter and his 6-year-old son, were in their beds after being asphyxiated by carbon monoxide fumes. After rigging his car by routing a hose that was hooked up to the exhaust, he placed his children inside and waited until they passed away slowly. He then carried the children back to their beds on the ground floor of the home. Amazingly, Green's wife Faith was discovered alive in the basement after being shot and stabbed by her psychotic husband. No motive for the murders was cited by the police, but it all seemed to stem from a domestic violence situation. Faith had filed for divorce back in 2013, but no further action was taken. She then filed again in August, the month before the slayings, which could have been a factor in the killer's decisions. During his sentencing hearing in March 2017, Faith, his then ex-wife, read her victim impact statement and said, "There's no punishment that fits the crime. Your justice will come when you burn in hell for all eternity." She then called him the devil in disguise before he was sentenced to 47 years to life behind bars. Number 4. Linda Patricia Thompson. In July 2016, a woman robbed a Cheyenne bank in Wyoming after being released from prison because she apparently wanted to go back behind bars. 59-year-old Linda Patricia Thompson successfully robbed the bank, only to throw the money in the air right outside the building, where she waited for police. When officers got there, she told them she wanted to be taken back to prison. She claimed she'd been beaten by strangers in a park in Cheyenne during the weekend before the robbery, and she'd suffered severe facial fractures as a result. She said she wasn't able to get a room at a homeless shelter, so she decided to rob the bank since she couldn't stay on the streets much longer. In court documents, FBI Special Agent Tori Smith stated that Thompson walked into a U.S. bank branch and handed the teller a note that said, "I have a gun. Give me all your money." In response, over $1,000 was given to the woman. Once outside the building, she threw the cash in the air and even offered some of it to people walking by. Thompson told investigators and the Oregon State Parole Office that she wouldn't do well on parole. She told them that she didn't want to be released in the first place, and as requested, she was sentenced to 6 years in a federal women's prison, which was far less than the 20 years she could have gotten. It's actually pretty sad that Linda thought her only option to survive was going back to prison. Number 3. Armando Zamora. A man on probation from New Mexico who was wearing an ankle monitor was accused of killing his wife with an axe back in 2021. 35-year-old Armando Zamora was charged with an open count of first-degree murder for the death of Erica Zamora, his 39-year-old wife, who mysteriously disappeared on September 26th. On October 1st, New Mexico State Police got involved in the investigation and learned that the couple went to the Gila National Forest to cut some wood before Erica went missing. Initially, Armando told officers that the two of them returned to Silver City afterward, But as they soon realized, that wasn't the truth. Investigators found out that Armando was on probation for criminal sexual contact of a minor under 13 years old and had been ordered to wear an ankle bracelet. So they used the man's GPS to find where the couple had been cutting wood. When they searched the area, Erica's deceased body was uncovered and Armando was arrested for murder. He was subsequently booked into the Grant County Detention Center, but his sentencing is unclear. Number 2. Steve Miller. In April 2017, a former probation officer stabbed and killed his girlfriend in the Las Vegas apartment they shared together. The victim, 45-year-old Glenda Taylor, was found with multiple stab wounds at the couple's home on West Bonanza Road. The defendant, 48-year-old Steve Miller, claimed that he takes medication for depression before accepting his plea deal in front of District Judge Jennifer Tagliati. Before his arrest, Miller spent time working as a juvenile probation officer for 15 years at the Northwest Juvenile Probation Center in Clark County. According to police reports, Miller killed his girlfriend before trying to take his own life. He was found with self-inflicted stab wounds on his hands and neck, but he survived the injuries. Miller was eventually charged with 1 count of murder with a deadly weapon and was booked into the Clark County Detention Center. Unfortunately, the outcome of this case is unclear, but if this murder truly was the result of a psychotic break, the story is even more tragic. Number 1. Gwen Levi. A 76-year-old woman from Maryland got out of prison early in 2020 thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic. But when she failed to answer her phone during a computer class, she was once again arrested in mid-2021. Gwen Levi, a cancer survivor and mother of 6, was taken into custody by police on June 12th. She'd apparently forgotten to get approval to go to class from her case manager at the halfway house she was staying in, the Volunteers of America, Chesapeake. Sapna Merchandani, Levi's attorney, told local news station WMAR2 that her client thought she'd gotten verbal approval for the class, which she'd already attended twice in the past. According to the halfway house, they tried to call Levi, but because she was in class, her cell phone was turned off and she was focusing. Levi told the news that if she'd picked up the phone, the halfway house said she wouldn't have gotten in this mess. But Merchandani reported that the simple mistake shouldn't end in her client getting sent back to jail. Luckily, Levi's request for compassionate release was granted by U.S. District Judge Deborah Chasnow, who said it would do little to force the 76-year-old woman, who's recovering from lung cancer, to serve the entirety of her sentence. Levi was serving over 30 years in prison for drug conspiracy charges, but her sentence was reduced to just 24 years. Before she was arrested for simply not answering her phone, she'd been in home confinement for 13 months and was volunteering in criminal justice groups. Would you rather get punched in the face by a complete stranger and only get a black eye? Or be attacked by someone you know and trust, only to find out they were on drugs? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Bad Badger.